Okay, let me turn this up. So today is our final lesson in this three-part series of 1 hour watercolors. And because it's been so dreadfully cold, I thought it might be fun to escape to a beach. And I have an exercise today where, as you can see, I've done this multiple times, where it's a beach dune, where we will be having sky and sea and terrain and sand and grasses. So we're going to be covering a lot of textures that we find on the planet. So the first thing we want to do, because the composition of this particular painting just has a strong diagonal. It's not like our other landscape that we did before that was all kind of horizontal lines with maybe some sloping hillsides. This has a diagonal line that really kind of intersects almost the center of the painting. So if you want to take a pencil, or even if you don't have a pencil, you could use a paintbrush with a very faint wash, just delineate a horizontal line going lightly down. You know, if you were going to make an X on the paper, just do 1/2 of the X that goes from the left top corner to the right lower corner. And then we're going to have two other guiding lines. We're going to have our horizon line, and a horizon line is where the sky meets the water. In this case, if we were just looking at terrain, our horizon line would be where the sky meets the earth. But we're going to have our topmost horizontal line, and I would say about the top third of the paper, just make a very faint horizontal line starting from the diagonal line and going across to the edge of the right edge of the paper. And then about, maybe an inch, 1.5 inches, even 2 if you want, make another horizontal line underneath that. So that's going to be our water line, where the sand meets the water. So basically it's 3 lines. We've got our dune line on the diagonal. We've got a horizon line where the water meets the sky. And we've got our water line where the sand meets the water. So those are just guidelines. You don't have to use a ruler. Again, this is just very loose. When you look at the ocean, when it's really calm, that horizontal water line, horizon line where the sky meets the water, is pretty much a hard horizontal. Even if the water is choppy, it might be painted a little wavy, but water is always level. You're really not going to see water at an angle. It's usually the viewer who's on an angle. Look at if you've ever been on a sailboat and it's starting to tip over, the horizon line starts going like this, you're in trouble. So water is very level, whereas earth is not, from making mountains that the earth goes up and down, but water is a hard horizontal, level all the way across and parallel with the top, bottom, and edges of your paper. So the color that we're going to start with is our sky, and that's going to be a light blue. What you could mix up is a cobalt. What do I have here? I got a cobalt. I'm going to squeeze out a little, this is Holbein cobalt blue hue. And I knew I was going to need my pliers because sometimes these little screw tops get stuck. Now the blue we're going to use for the sky is definitely going to be a more true blue than the water we're going to use for, I mean, the color we're going to use for the water, where we're going to add some green to it. If you look at the ocean sometimes, it's almost like a bluish green, depending on the depth of the water and the sunlight reflecting off the water. The water doesn't really have a color. It takes on a color from the reflected light of the sky. And if the water is shallow, it will be a different color than the deeper waters. It'll be which will be darker. So we won't be using a lot of reds today. We'll be using blues and yellows. If you just have your primaries, that's okay. You'll mix your blue and your yellow to get a greenish color. If you need a brown, and for the sandy areas, I use, let me see. So let me show you with my, see, my sky is going to be like a cobalt blue in my sampler here. And I put out also a dab. I have pulled the, what else did I pull? Oh, I pulled the cobalt green to, where's the cobalt green? To mix in for the water, because I want my water to be, here's my cobalt green. So that's like an aqua color. And for the sandy areas, I'm squeezing out a little yellow ochre. And what else did I select? Yellow ochre. Oh, I've got some quinacridone gold, which is probably the most yellowy gold I'll be using. And I thought I got some, didn't I put out some like burnt umber or something? Yeah, I have some, it's like a, where is that? Oh, a Naples yellow. If you have that, you could pull a little of that out. Oh, and raw sienna. If you have raw sienna for the sand. So, but now if you don't have any things like in the brownish area, and you only have your primaries, mix the red, yellow, and blue together, you'll get a brown, and just keep adding more yellow to it. And it will become like a sandy, brownish, goldy color. Yellow, among the three primary colors, yellow is considered the weakest of the three primaries, meaning that it's often the most transparent of the three colors, and its density, its value is often the lightest. Density and value meaning the intensity or the darkest color. We know that we can make a super dark blue like an indigo or a navy, and we can make a super dark red like a wine color, or a crimson and maroon. But to get a super dark yellow is challenging, because then you're going to get more into your sienna colors and your browns. So just, a little fun fact, yellow is considered the weakest of the triad of primaries. So what I want to do first, let me make sure I've got my water cups. Wake up my colors with a spritz. Now, you do not have to wet the paper for this. This is actually a hot press that I'm working on. It's smooth. Some of the other substrates I have at the ready, because you know me, I do this more than once. This is the cold press that has more of the bumpiness on it. And just to recap, hot press is smooth and sleek, like if you hot press your hair. Cold press is like when you get goosebumps and it's a little bumpy on the surface, and our pigments, our colors will often settle in those tiny little swales and valleys of the paper to create more of a mottled or textured surface than you might get with the smooth hot press paper. So you don't have to, but you could if you want to just wet the top part of your paper, but don't wet it all the way down to your first line, to your skyline, your horizon line. I wet it to maybe like an inch above my skyline, because now what I'm going to do, let me get my blue going. And it's okay if the water dries. Let me get my cobalt. If the water dries, that's okay, because the paper will remember that you hit it up with water. It's not going to be like super dried out by the time I revisit this in a minute. I'm just mixing up. I squeezed out some cobalt blue and I'm adding some water to it. And I forgot to get a scrap piece of paper to test out. I'll use one of the back of one of these old papers, because I like, before I commit to my pad or my paper, I like to see how dark my color is. Okay, that's not bad. I'll use that. Now, also remember, especially with the blue family and watercolor, it will dry about 30 to 40% lighter than it appears when it's wet. That's just the nature, I guess most things appear darker when they're wet. If you're using acrylic paint, usually acrylic paint dries darker than it looks like when it's wet. I want to have my tissue ready too, because I'm going to show you, and I'll demonstrate it, and then we'll all do it together. So watch me first. I'm now going to put some sky in. And of course, you know me with my problem here, tilting this up, it's going to run all over. And I'm not going all the way down. Well, maybe I will. Maybe I'll make that horizontal line where the water meets the sky. And then I'm going to cut off that. I'm going to truncate that diagonal line for the top of my dune. So now what I'm going to do, while this is still wet, rinse off my brush and blot it. I'm going to take my tissue and I'm going to lift out clouds with the tissue. So basically you're blotting out, but you want to turn your tissue so it doesn't make the same mark all over. And also sometimes it makes like these little lines I don't like. So I go back in and I twist the tissue because I want to lift out the color and create some clouds. So I don't have to paint around. And if you really press hard, you can take off just about all the pigment, scrub it right off, so you'll have some white clouds. But for the most part, they will look rather ethereal with some light blue poking in. And I'm just going to make sure my brush is damp and not super wet, and maybe soften the bottom if I'm getting too many hard edges. We like soft edges on our clouds. And I might even lift off with the damp brush and remove some of the paint with the brush. Now, usually clouds are a little flatter on the bottom and they're a little fluffier and cotton ball-y on the top. So I might move on the bottom of the cloud my brush a little left to right to get some striation in the sky on the bottom. And in the top, I let them remain puffy like that. And use your brush to adjust it any way that you see fit in your little cloud world. These are your clouds. You can make them as puffy as you want, like that. Now, another way, because you know I'm going to show this to you a few different times. I'm going to set that aside to dry. If you have a second substrate ready or a second box on a larger piece, we're going to do this again. I'm just going to, this time, here's my diagonal line for the dune and my water and my beach. I made it a little darker so maybe you could see it. So this time I want to show you another way to make your clouds is to show that if you make strong diagonal strokes with your brush, it will give you the suggestion that it's a very windy day and the clouds are moving along at quite a clip. So, and I also I'm not going to try and mark up all the paper this time. I want to leave some white if I can. So coming in with some strong strokes on a diagonal to show that the clouds, I have to get that ocean line, that the clouds, it's a windy day and they're being manipulated by these strong gusts of wind. And again, I don't know, I don't want to fill in all the area. I want to leave some white paper to give you the suggestion of clouds, because it's preferable in watercolor, in the classic teaching of watercolor. Your white area should remain the paper. You don't want to ideally cover the whole thing with light blue and then go back and try and draw white clouds. White watercolor is too transparent. It's not thick enough and opaque enough to get the effect you want. You're going to get your strongest whites by just not putting paint in that area, by making the naked paper your white areas, your white space. So I'm just going to leave that for now, let it dry. So if we go back to our dune, usually the top of our sky is going to dry faster than the bottom, especially if you're working on an angle and gravity is going to pull your pigment down the page. What I'm going to do now, because I don't want to go right in with the water yet, in the event this is not dry. It looks dry, but when I put my finger on it, it's still a little damp, because I don't want my colors to blend. If you want a crisp edge, you want to have your first color that you lay down be totally dry, because if it's not, let me demo this. This is like not a great painting, so I'm just going to use the back. If this is my sky, and we know our water is going to be level. Okay, I want to put out a little of that cobalt green here. Now, when we do the water, you want to add, you can mix up a new color or add a little bit of yellow to your blue, because we don't want a true green for the water, but we want like an aqua or a turquoise. So when the two colors, when the water meets the sky, I want a hard line. That might be a little too soft, because you don't want your aqua or your greenish water to, this would this would be like a foggy morning where your water line is kind of blurred, but you don't want your green to rush back into your blue sky area and create a bloom if it's too wet. So I think I might be okay with this first one I did. I think with the exception of this little corner over there, which I'm going to try and pick up that bead. And I usually work to the edge because even if I like the painting, I'm always going to crop it in. The edge always has like a little drip, or sometimes I might test drive a color and put it in the margin. Some artists definitely block out a rectangle, in which they were, but I usually just go right to the edge. So now what I'm going to do is mix up my aqua color. And I want to make a horizontal line from my Dune. And I'm holding my hand steady in one swoop over to the edge like that. Because now what I'm going to do is wet my brush and blot it off. I have a towel. And I'm going to kind of like bring the water down from the top of the line and kind of swirl it. And I don't want to fill it in all the way. I want to leave some white gaps to create a suggestion of like a breaker, you know, like how the white caps of the waves. We want to keep a little white space in there. To suggest we've got some wave activity going on like that. Just leave some white space. And if you find it's all too much of the same color, because this, to me, the color that's in the distance is going to be darker, where the water meets the sky and it's way out and it's way deep out there. It's going to be a little darker. So I might blend in a little of my cobalt blue with my cobalt green to try and make where the water meets the sky a little darker without creating runbacks, if I can help it. And just moving my brush from side to side. And I don't have to, you know, just making marks. Some are darker than others because that'll give you the effect of the depth of the water. The top of the water is going to be lighter, like at the crest of a wave where the sun is shining down on it, and the darker colors are going to be for the deeper water. So in watercolor, we usually work from light to dark, which means we do our lighter colors first and then add dark on top of it, because it's really hard to add light colors on top of dark in watercolor. It's such a transparent medium. And I'm moving my paper around to get the pigment to do what I want it to do. But in the end, it's going to do what it wants anyway. So I'm going to let that one rest, and I'm going to move to my other one on the cold press paper and do it again. So I'm going to work my water line where it meets the sky, try and get that level because it is a calm sea, except for the suggestion of the white waves where I'm going to leave some white space. Yeah, so you have stuff like that going on, and your ocean can be very busy if it has a lot of these wave-like affectations. If you want a very calm ocean, because I have a busy sky here, a windswept sky. So that means that my ocean's going to be windswept also. The water's going to be choppy. In a calm sky, I can have very calm water. So I might not have a lot of wave activity. The water will be more smooth and longer horizontal strokes and not as many soft, choppy strokes as I would with busy water that's getting moved around by the wind. Okay. Now, I definitely want to make sure that we have a little drying time in here, because when we start the sandy area and the grasses, they're going to represent what's in the foreground of the painting, because we started with the thing that was the most far away. Oh, wait a minute, let me take this out. What you can do, if you find you do a lot of 5x7s, you can buy on Amazon. I buy these pre-made mat kits, and they come with a plastic bag, a 5x7 mat, and the mat backing, where all you have to do is hinge the mat, put your painting in, and, you know, like put a little label or something on the back and put it in the plastic bag, and it's ready for sale or presentation, or makes a nice gift. Because as an artist, a lot of the times your family and friends almost expect art from you, or if it's a token of love or appreciation, you might want to give them a little painting. To just give them a piece of paper, it's like, you know, it's nice, okay, thank you. But if you give it to them presented, matted in a cello bag, and you've signed it, it's much more professional, and it makes a much nicer presentation. And you don't have to be cutting mats. These mats at Michael's or something are like $4 a set. I buy these in 5x7 sizes and 8x10 sizes. And I buy them like in packages of 10. And they work out to be maybe $2 a mat set. And the mat set being the cello bag, the mat, and the mat board backing. So it's a nice thing to have on hand, especially if you find that you want to share your art.
And you swap out the picture if it turns out that that was your crappy one?
Oh, absolutely. I do that all the time, Debbie. I look at old paintings and I say, no, I need that mat, and I'll rip this right out. Now, this I taped to the back of the window of the mat. You can also tape it to the board, so the window, you know, is more open, whatever. But yeah, I would suggest, and also what I like about a mat, also, I'm all corralled in here to show you, but maybe I have one over here. If I have an old mat that maybe got damaged or got a stain, how's this one doing? Did I do that? Oh, I did the same thing there. All right, but let's pretend I didn't. I'm going to dismantle it. Sometimes we mat the painting to the backboard, and when you flip it, it's like that. Well, if you have a mat that you're not using, now that I'm taking this whole thing apart to show you. Let's say you have an old mat. It's very handy if you are trying to figure out, if you have a painting and you say, you know, I don't love all the painting, but I like a part of the painting. So to go back and use your mat to section off a piece of the painting that you like, to isolate it. Well, that's about the same size, or to crop things out of it. So just because a map might get damaged, don't throw it away. It's a handy viewfinder for cropping if you want to isolate an image. Okay, so now that I've done all this talking, hopefully our blues and greens and our water and our sky will be dry enough to proceed. Because now what I want to do is, oh, I should have done that one too, but I didn't. Mix up our sand color. So I have some yellow ochre, I've got some raw sienna, and let me give them a squirt to make sure they're alive and well here. And on a piece of scrap, or on the back of something, yeah, this one. Oh, so you can also, I'll get to that later. All right. I want to mix up a sand color. And the sand is not super yellow. You know, it wouldn't be like a sunshine yellow, but you would get some goldens. That's too light. I'm just making little strokes because you're going to get all kinds of striation of color and the sand, but we want to start off lighter rather than darker because we want to add our darker values. I'm adding a little yellow ochre to this. Yeah, this is like a beige, like a golden beige color. We'll be going darker. So I'm going to be starting lighter and then going darker. So let me make sure my color is strong enough because I don't want it to run off the page like it always does with the drips when I do this vertically. Okay, so I'm using a big brush and I'm just going to start laying in and not so it's okay if I'm going over the sky a little bit. That doesn't bother me because I can come back with the grasses and camouflage that. So my dune area, I'm doing some up and down motions like that, just up and down. And I'm going to let it trickle and do its thing. But
Hi, Katie, can you
yeah.
just, what color, I don't have that ochre color. All I have is yellow, red, and blue. So what would I mix to get that?
Okay. Mix a little, put a little squirt of yellow in an area and very carefully add just a tiny bit of red to it. I mean, and then a tiny bit of your blue. And it should make like a brownish, greenish. I'm going to add a little bit more red. Yeah, see, I'm getting like, it's like a khaki color. Let me show you. This is the color I'm getting when I mix all three of my red, blue, and yellow together. But I want to add a little bit more yellow than the other colors because I want it to be like a golden sand color. So I'm going to now use that color that I just mixed up from my primaries. I'm going to use that. I think I don't want it to be that green. So I need to add more yellow, but I'm going to use that for where my sand area is down there.
Mhm.
And I'm going to wet my brush and blot it and start lifting out some of the color. So I get a striation because it's all not just one color. So I blot my brush and use it to pick up color. So we're like removing color with the damp brush, kind of like we did with the tissue. So the edge where the dune meets the sand is more of a hard edge because this is in front of us. The closest thing to us is this dune. So that's why I have delineated it as a different color. And while it's still wet, I'm going to avoid the edge where it meets the background sand. And I'm just going to work within the body of the dune now with some darker brush strokes. So using a more intense color of brown or sand. And don't worry about the top yet, because that comes last up here, the top of it. So I'm just making some, I'm pressing in different areas on the brush, just making some suggestions of how the sand kind of responds to gravity. And making some marks like that. So you get the shadow, like the rivulets, or how when we do our grasses, when they get hit with ocean spray and they start dripping, they create rivulets in the dune. And you want to bring in as many variations of that color as you can, because there's so many shadows going on. As you know, the sand isn't just one color. I'm bringing in some darks and letting them drip and tilting my paper and letting it mix and mingle. Now, to make it interesting, I think I did it in a couple of these. I made almost a purple color with a little bit of red and a little bit of blue and my yellow. And oh yeah, that's making like a another darker color. See, I just added another darker purplish and letting it swirl and drip down to create shadows. Maybe I'll turn my paper upside down and let it drip the other way. So we want to create the illusion of 3-dimension on a 2-dimension surface by incorporating different values, which means the darkness and the lightness and the intensity of a color. And I'm avoiding that edge because I don't want to blur there. I do want a hard edge. So I'm going to move that around, put this aside and work on my other one. Oh, and this is the one that was on the hot press. So that should be interesting how that is going to react to that paper surface. So let me make sure my brush is nice and juicy. And I'm going to, yeah, the color totally, the paint reacts totally different on the hot press. It's much slicker. Just making some bold strokes, just like that. And with watercolor, as they say, the fewer strokes, the better. So if you like something, leave it alone. How many times have I ruined a watercolor by overworking it? So I'm just going to let this drip and mix and dry before I add the sand color where over here, because I want that hard edge. So I'm just going to let that do its watercolor thing right now. There, let it drip. Move it around. Okay, and I'm gonna let that sit back and dry for a minute. Okay, so now while all my dark brown drips are in the middle of the front ground dune, when it dries, I'll probably go over with more colors, but right now I want it to dry. I'm just moving these drips a little bit. I'm gonna let that dry because I might add some darker streaks, and then when it's all dry, I'll probably go over it with one unifying light beige wash that sometimes it just creates the right veil over that brings all the layers together. Because right now this is a little choppy for me. When it dries, I'll reassess it. But while it's drying, okay, because I'm on the clock here, it's trying to get the watercolor to dry. You could use a hair dryer, a blow dryer, but sometimes the blow dryer, if it's too hot, it can alter with the chemical makeup in the paint, and it could like cook some of these particles, especially like in the cobalt families, and you could get a graininess. And also if it's too forceful, too blowy, it will blow the pigment around the page, which you may or may not want. But what I want to do now is take another brush, and this time I'm taking a flat brush. This is maybe a 1-inch flat brush. And I'm going to do some testing before I do it right on my painting, my substrate, because I want to demonstrate a dry brush technique for getting texture. So I'm taking my brush, and I didn't even wet it. I took a dry brush and I put it right in some of my raw sienna, just to get pigment on that brush. And I'm going to use a test piece of paper to try and get a lot of that pigment off of there. So I'm down to a streakiness where it's not going to make a solid line, because I'm just going to lightly hit up the surface to get some streakiness like that. So you can, it's not a solid stroke like this. I want to see some white space. I want to see some streakiness, like my brush is running out of paint here. And that striation is creating a dry brush effect that will give our sand some suggestion of color variation. And I might take this brush and create a little dry brush in my dune also. I had a drip that I was just stroking out a little bit like that to try and get a featheriness to it. Okay, now what I want to do with my sand back here is I'm going to mask out the area. And what I mean by that is I'm going to cover the area that I don't want to get paint on. So I'm going to cover my ocean, and I'm going to cover the big dune for now. And I'm just going to take that kind of triangular shape of the sand that is meeting the water. And I'm going to do some splatter there to achieve a more sandy kind of look. So I'll take a brush, not a super big brush. Maybe this is like a 12, a 10 or a 12 will do. The bigger the brush, the bigger the splatter. So I'm going to wet it. I'm going to put it in some really diluted paint. And I'm just going to, let me see if I can tilt this down. Can I raise that up? I need to put it on something. Put it on here, see if that'll work. Yeah, so this is my area here that I want to splatter. And I'm just going to hold my knuckle and tap the paintbrush. And when I remove my mask, you'll see I've got all those dots. But I don't love every single one of those dots. So I'm going to take my brush and maybe just smush out a few of them. You know, just alter them so they're not all the same. I don't want it to look, you know, polka dotted. I just want the dots to give some affectation of surface texture. Like that. We have people who have walked on the sand. There's all kinds of pock marks and there's different colors to the sand. So adding splatter and then smushing out some of the splatters, like I flattened out a few of them so they kind of look like dips in the sand where people have walked. How am I doing for time? Good. Okay. So like I said, I'm going to revisit my Dune and maybe do some deeper strokes in a deeper color. I kind of like that. It's almost like a purple. Because even when we look at the snow outside and the shadows that the trees make on the snow are not just gray. Sometimes they're an icy blue. Sometimes they're a purple. Sometimes they have a goldenness to them at the certain times a day. So I'm just making some more little, you know, lines to add some depth. And I like to take the brush and start with the tippy point and then go down and like press on it and then let up on it and then press on it and then let up on it. So you get a striated line. It's not the same width. It's fat and thin and fat and thin. So it just makes a more interesting line quality. You've got some darker shadows and some lighter shadows. Like that. And then when this is dry, I'm probably going to do a whole unifying wash over it. I hope it's dry in a couple minutes so I can show you. Because now what I want to do is move to the decorative grasses, which is at the top of our dune. And those are fun to do because now you want to mix up more of like a greenish, brownish color. So you'll be using your blue and your red. And if you want to and add your yellow to it to make a more brown color. I'm going to be going now to a smaller brush. And I have found is in most of my paintings, even my acrylics and oils, I start with my big brushes first and my big shapes, my big areas. And then I work down to my smaller shapes at the very end of the painting. And for the detail, because I don't get into detail in the beginning. In the beginning, it's all about the big shapes, defining what the big shapes are. And here it's pretty easy. We've got sky, we've got water, and we've got two kinds of sand going on. We got a dune, and we have, where it meets the water. Now, what I didn't get into this session, because we only have an hour, and when you do a beach scene, there's so many elements you can be doing. But I do have painting sessions. I don't know if they're on YouTube yet, or how to paint a wave, or how to paint where the water, that ebb thing, where the water meets the sand and the sand starts receding, the flotsam and jetsam, or whatever it is. That's a whole other lesson. Today we're dealing with just the big shapes. So what I'm doing with a smaller brush now, I think I've got like a sap green going on here. And I want to use different variation. I've got my sap, I've got my brownish color, my sienna. To do our grasses, they're fun. You just make strokes coming out of the top of the dune like that. With I'm using a rigger, and your grasses don't have to be, because these grasses are getting hit by the wind, because I have this windy sky and this windy water. So the wind seems to be moving this way in this painting. So I'm going to have my grasses kind of affecting that. And this, you can do hundreds of strokes in different colors, and you can also bend them. Like the grass might come out and then take a little bendy that way, or the grass will come out and then take a little bendy. So, and you lift up the pressure at the end of your stroke to get that thinner tip of your grass. So I'm lifting up. So it's a little thinner at the tip than it is where it meets the dune. And I have these drippy things here that I'm just going to expand down the dune. Oh, and it's mixing in with the wet area and making very interesting mixing and mingling with the dune. And now I'm going to not even clean my brush off. I'm going to dip it in more of a sap green to create more grasses, and they might be a different variety now that are more like a curly willow, where they have more of a bend to them, like that. Because all your grasses don't have to be alike. You could have, I don't know, fescue or whatever they have, all these different. And I'm letting them run. I'm letting them run down the dune and create their own little fun rivulets. And just keep adding grasses. And the colors will mix. You'll get a nice variety of textures. And I would love to see your finished paintings. Rita sent me a lovely painting. Rita, with your permission, Rita L. I have two Ritas. With your permission, can I share it with the class?
Sure.
Okay, I will. I'll put it in the email attachment, because I love a little show and tell. I know some people are shy. They might not want to show their work,
The
but
first
I'm not
painting I
going to
ever,
force you.
it's the first painting I ever did, just to let you.
Good.
know.
Isn't it a feel-good thing to sit down and paint? It reminds me of those old commercials. Calgon, take me away. I can get lost. Sometimes I'm in my studio painting and I'll look up and say, oh my God, it's 6 o'clock. I haven't even thought about what I'm going to make for dinner. I get lost in the time and in the fun of it all. It's so relaxing. And especially in this cold weather, to be on the beach, imagining in another week I'll be there. So I'm getting myself psyched.
Where are you going?
I'm going to start off at my daughter's house in Palm City, which is up near Stewart. And then I have so many relatives and family all over. I'll be kind of hopping from one guest room to another for 2 months. It'll be great because I paint every day and it's fun to paint different environments. You know, go to the beach. I love the beach and I love to paint at the beach. But I'm not the most intrepid plein air painter. I mean, I know outdoor painters who are out there in the snow and they snowshoe with a backpack full of supplies and a collapsible easel. That's not me. I like an umbrella with on a cabana table, so I have a surface to put all my stuff on and an umbrella to protect me from the sun. And I go out very early before the pool gets crowded, where people start coming around looking over my shoulder and saying, what you doing? So that's when I know it's time to go home. I'm adding a little drop of green to the top of my grasses where it's really wet to try and bring in some more darker colors. I think I'm going to have some grasses come out of there like that. They're not just at the top of the dune. They kind of cascade down the top, from the top of the dune. Stick out like that. So when I'm going to let this dry, and what I'll probably do is I'll include my finished in tomorrow's email to you. Because what I'm going to do, and you might want to try it too, right now, my dune in the foreground is a little too stripy for me. So when it's all dry, I'm going to come in with one more wash of my burnt sienna. And it's going to be transparent and it's going to unify the dune. So it'll be more like that, where it's a little bit more unified there. And see how I brought in some purples also? Because right now this is too stripy for me. So it needs an overlaying veil of color to bring these colors in cohesion with each other. So today we learned how to drop out clouds in the sky, or to even use white space of the paper to create cloud formations, how we did water, affecting white caps on water by leaving white space, and I'm going to go back with this and do some darker because this is just too one color for me to be the water. And then we worked on dunes and how the dune grasses kind of splay out all over the place and run down. There's really no way you can mess this up because so many things in nature being so organic, there's not one true shade. So there's really no way you can mess up your clouds. I mean, your clouds might not look as credible if they did look like little cotton balls or little puffy lammies or sheeps in the sky. But if you smudge them around, there's really no bad cloud because clouds are amorphous, they're ever changing. The water is ever changing. So you're really capturing something that's already in your imagination. You can always work from a photograph, but sometimes I just like to create landscapes from my rote knowledge and my little fantasy landscapes inside my head. So that was our beach scene today of With the Dune. Are there any questions? All right, I am recording. Oh, let me see. Great, Debbie. I love how you got that. So the dune, the rivulets in the dune. Oh, and look at Rita. I love the grass on top. And I like how you girls broke the sand colors where you can definitely see which area is the dune and which area is the sand that meets the water. Bravo. Keep up the good work, ladies. Have fun painting, and maybe I'll see you in the spring. I think I'm in Scarsdale and Chappaqua. I'm doing a Zoom drawing class. Scarsdale is afternoons from 1 to 2. I'm not sure what day. We're still working on that. And if you want to take a night class, that would be through Chappaqua Continuing Ed, and those classes for arts from 7 to 8 at night. But you'll probably get a springtime email from me letting you know what my up and coming classes are for the semester if you're interested. Thank you so much for spending your Tuesday afternoons with me this month. And
Thank you. Another painting class. I would be very happy to do another painting class.
okay, great. All right. Thank you.
Thank you,
I'll
Katie.
be in touch. Happy
Have a
painting,
good trip.
ladies. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.